Good afternoon. My name is Carrie Jennison, and I'm the Vice Chair, the incoming Chair for Enterprise Seattle. And for those of you who were with us this morning, you heard a term that I had not heard before, but it was Seattle Mystique. And I think that Sally Jewell and Mick Dinsmore and Peter Orser are three examples of the kind of leadership that makes this city such a great place to live and to work. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you today another one of those leaders in this area, Cheryl Scott, the Chief Operating Officer for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In her role with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, just real briefly, she has responsibility for legal, HR, IT, finance and administration, and many, many other functions there. Outside of Foundation, she's had extensive board experience and, in fact, currently sits on the board of REI, as you heard earlier. She's also a clinical professor with the University of Washington in the Department of Health Services. What you probably don't know, or maybe you do because it was in the program, Cheryl was born and raised in the Seattle area. Are there any other Chief Sealth High School alumni out there? Yeah. I know there's a lot of other Huskies out there. Cheryl got both her undergraduate and her graduate degrees from the University of Washington, so longtime resident of this area. Prior to joining the Gates Foundation, Cheryl was the Chief Executive Officer of Group Health, had a long career with Group Health Cooperative, and for those of you not familiar with that organization, it's a 60-year-old nonprofit, consumer-governed healthcare organization in this area, and also one of the largest employers in the state of Washington. And that's where I met Cheryl 15 years ago. She was our chief operating officer, and I was working my way through college in one of our medical centers. And John mentioned just a few minutes ago about the mark of a great leader is someone who leaves the organization in a better place than they found them. And there's absolutely no question that Cheryl did that for Group Health. In 1998, she took over as our chief executive officer. We were losing $50 million a year at that point in time. And by the time she retired, we had returned to a level of financial stability that, as the person currently sitting in the CFO chair, I can tell you I greatly, greatly appreciate. You might be thinking to yourself that financial turnaround skills perhaps might not be entirely necessary at the Gates Foundation, but I think what it really is, it's a sign of her leadership. She's a wonderful leader, and her intelligence and her ability to really motivate, inspire, and lead people are the skills that are going to serve the foundation and the millions of people that they will touch very, very well. And before I turn it over to her, I do want to let those of you who work for the foundation in on a couple little secrets. A few of us from Group Health, we got together earlier and we wanted to give you just a couple insights. If you're in a meeting with Cheryl and she starts banging her spoon against her forehead, it means she's getting a little bit frustrated. If she pulls her turtleneck up over her nose, that's when you know things have gotten really bad. So there's just a couple insights to help you figure out your new Chief Operating Officer, Cheryl Scott. Thank you.
Yeah, the turtleneck thing is pretty dangerous, actually. Well, thank you all. It's such an honor, and it's just great to be back, personally, to be with all of you today, in a different job, obviously. We talk about leaders. There are two people I would like to recognize who are mentors for me in both my old job and in my new job. And I believe that if these two gentlemen could just run everything, we would all be much better off. And I'm referring to Aubrey Davis, one of the founders of Group Health Cooperative, and Bill Gates Sr., one of the founders of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So the two of you can rise and to be acknowledged. So all in favor of them being in charge, say aye. Opposed? It carries. As business leaders of Seattle, you already know a lot about my boss. This afternoon, I want to share with you some of the things I've learned about my boss in the last 6 months that I've been on the job. For example, my boss is a whiz with computers. And my boss is a bookworm. And I want to dispel one nasty rumor. I've heard that talk that my boss is a college dropout. But as you can see, that's simply not the case. At the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we are always reminding ourselves of who we really are working for. Around the office, we talk constantly about this child, known affectionately as the kid in the bucket. We work for him, and we work for her. Bill and Melinda started this foundation because they believe that every person has equal worth. The kid in the bucket is just as precious as your kid or mine, and it is way past time to give hundreds of million kids in these buckets, these incredible stories, the chance to live a healthy and productive life just like the rest of us. Warren Buffett believes this too, and that's why he made an amazing gift to the foundation last year. You may have read about it, huh? Warren's unprecedented contribution will allow us to double our grant making, double it, starting in the year 2009 to something around $3 billion. The reason Warren decided to support the foundation, and the reason Bill and Melinda have been putting more of their energy into it, and the reason that Bill Sr. started this whole thing off so many years ago, is that they believe we are living in a unique moment in history of time. This is a time, our time is now, when advances in fields as diverse as telecommunications, biotechnology, finance, and education are making it possible to solve big problems like never before. You know, when I was a kid and I was watching the ads for care, I said, oh, geez, you know, that just is how it's always going to be. That's not true. It doesn't have to be that way. If these advances are focused on the problems of people and the most pressing needs and the fewest champions, then within this century, billions of people will be healthier, to get a better education, and the power to lift themselves out of their own poverty. These additional resources and our heightened sense of urgency provide amazing opportunities, but they also pose a technical problem. We're also just an organization, right? We're a group of people, and how in the heck are we going to learn to be as effective as the mission set out before us? Effective as a company, as an organization, as an enterprise. And that is a big piece of my job, to help us figure out how we grow so we can live up to this challenge. And that's what I want to talk to you today, is about this issue of growth and scaling up. But I want to also just talk a little bit right now about what we do first. Around the world, we are committed to improving the health of millions of people who are sick and dying from diseases that we don't even have in the United States. Today started, today will end. In that period of time, 1,000 kids will die. You want to guess what they're going to die of? Measles. Even though there's a 15-cent vaccine that has been available for four, not years, folks, decades. So we try to help people in the developing world get access to these treatments that already exist, and we support research into new life-saving solutions. Of course, we know it doesn't do much good to save a child from measles if she is destined to die of malnutrition a few years later. So we also focus on fighting poverty and hunger in developing countries. 16 of the 18 most undernourished countries in the world are packed together in sub-Saharan Africa. Yet few people are looking for ways to make that continent stable crops, high-yielding, and more nutritious. Pretty simple, right? You would think we could focus on that, correct? Instead, I have to report to you that the crop with the fastest growing research budget in the world is, guess, golf grass. 4. These international programs are evidence of the philosophy that's very important to us, that in our world, borders matter less and less because advances in technology are bringing us closer together. On the web, we can see pictures of Africa or Asia just minutes after they've been taken. We can email, text message, talk on the phone or video conference, or fly. We are flat, no doubt about it. And yet, even in a borderless society, we need a home base that keeps us grounded. The Foundation's home is in the Great Pacific Northwest. And a lot of our values are homegrown: commitment, optimism, resilience. As most of you know, you just heard from Carrie, I am one of those, having been born here, and I'm so darn proud of this community. I grew up here. I grew up with kids in White Center. I've seen that kind of poverty, and I got to tell you, this has to start here at home before we talk about the world. Because we love our home, we're dedicated to making sure that all kids in Washington State have the opportunity to make the most of their lives. If we can't do it here in one of the best economies in the world, and this is obviously what you've been talking about this morning, in one of the most generous communities in the world, then how can we do it anywhere? To that end, the Gates Foundation has supported more than 600 community organizations in Washington State and the greater Portland area, and they are working hard to improve lives of vulnerable kids and families. Organizations like the YWCA, HopeLink, and the Technology Access Foundation. One of our biggest initiatives here in the Pacific Northwest is aimed at ending family homelessness in Puget Sound. Right here in our community, there are thousands of parents and young children who don't have a safe place to sleep at night. We see them. We see them every day. In 2000, with assistance from many government partners, we launched the Sound Families Initiative, which gives homeless families a place to live, plus the social services they need to get back on their feet. Those services include domestic abuse, counseling, alcohol, drug treatment, job training, child care, and much more. It's a challenge for this business community to make sure that economic growth reaches everyone. Of course it is. That's the theme of this whole conference. But you've really leaned into the issue of us as a society and as a community as well. And as an example, the Committee to End Homelessness in King County is implementing a 10-year plan, and many, many, many people in this room have played a key role in developing that plan. From the kid in the bucket in Africa to the kid on the streets in Pioneer Square, our foundation has an incredibly diverse mission and the opportunity to make a real impact. So how are we going to use our resources to get this work done in the most effective and efficient way possible? The foundation, as you know, is still a relatively new organization. I think in large part, one would say that we really got started in like 2000. So in a sense, it's still kind of a startup. When I started, we had about 300 employees. By 2010, when we moved to our new campus in Seattle Center, I will guarantee you we'll have a whole lot more. But if we don't get our growth right, we will find ourselves running just like that little hamster, and running in place, trying to just keep up. And our mission and our imperative is just too important to let that happen. I would say that the organization I joined 6 months ago is a well-run organization. However, what we have done in the past is no guarantee that we will continue in the future to have the right infrastructure and platform for growth. And when you think about a platform, I always think of this great, remember when you were a kid and you were going on vacation and you loaded up the brothers and the sisters and the mom and the dad and the crazy uncle from Duluth, and I hope nobody's from Duluth, you got the rack was full of luggage, right? And the back was all, remember on that moment? And then there was a cat somewhere thrown in there and a dog. And then you left the driveway, and what happened? The chassis started to drag across the street. Sparks flying, children screaming, parents going, "Oh, God, save me." Chassis are important, aren't they? They have to carry the load. You have to design the car so it can do what you need it to do. As is a chassis for a car, so is a chassis for an organization. And as the foundation, gets ready for a very large journey here, our chassis has to be right. We have to build it in a way that will endure and perform over the long haul. So we've launched something called, believe it or not, the Chassis Project. True. To make sure that we do grow wisely. We're looking at 3 key areas as we do this work. First, how do we get the right people, and how do we get the people right, I would say. Second, how do we get right business processes and technology? And third, how do we make sure our culture adapts to the changes or change for our culture and for all of us? How do we orient people in a new way of doing things while keeping the great aspects of the old way? First, a little bit about our people. In terms of hiring, we face a unique challenge. For about half the positions we have to fill, and by the way, we're going to be filling 200 new positions in the next 18 months, 200. We think about that. About 100 of those are what's called program officers, experts in a particular piece of work, right? That's all executive search if you think about it. That's not just going out and doing the monster.com. There's a real search that has to happen and a real match between an individual's expertise and promise and vigor of thinking, as well as their interest in coming into philanthropy and making a difference. It's a big deal. It's a big search. Our searches for these positions take about 6 months. And we're going to find 100 of them in the next 18 months. That's a lot. It's a huge challenge. It's exciting. It's extraordinarily exciting. But you have to take that so darn seriously. I think about the Gates Foundation is amazing to me as well, as when you think about these program officers. We always talk about our global health programs, but you know, for heaven's sakes, we have tons of issues going on in the Northwest. We have things going on in education, and we have this emerging new group in global development. We have 22 separate portfolios, if you will, or product lines. So imagine building an organization of 300 people with 22 product lines. The complexity is significant and not small. So as we do these searches, let's say to find an individual who knows about clean water in India, we have to be respectful of that process and how we do that work. The irony is, to handle this work, we're beefing up even our own recruiting team. Last year we had 3 people. This year it's 8, and next year it'll go to 16. So how do you recruit the recruiters, right? It goes on and on. And how do you create the passion and the focus and the will to make that happen in time frames that make sense, but also look for the best people along the way? What we found is critical to us, for us internally, is that we have a mental model now going forward that the entire foundation is a recruiting organization. Everyone is going to have to lean into this thing. There's just not another way around it. And so the partnership between the human resources team and the foundation program officers and everyone else is kind of into this. And this is sort of like job one, is to get the people right. To get the people, but to get the people right. Second, I want to talk a little bit about, for our organization, is processes and technology. As you all know, that when you're a startup, many of you have done that, obviously, and you're small, you can many times make do with the technology that you've got. There are problems with it. You can work around it. You can do the workaround, right? You can just kind of make it happen. But once you start to scale, you've got to tailor your technology to your needs. As you know this very well, it's a business imperative. For us, let me give you an example that we're dealing with right now. For the last 7 years, we've been using a software package to manage our grants and contracts. It works okay. But about 6 months ago, it became clear that we needed to upgrade and to potentially even change the application software itself. But now, here we are in an organization moving very quickly with all these different portfolios, all these different new people, and here we are, hi, I'm from corporate, I'm here to change your system. Not easy. And what we're also finding is that the way people do business in education is different than they do business in malaria, and is different than they do business in high schools. Do we find different applications, different technologies? No. We find the best one we can, and then ask forgiveness from our colleagues as they need to change a bit their business processes to support the best technology available. That's different for us. We're used to customizing. To try to find that efficiency and that effectiveness, we're asking people to not change only to become a recruiting organization, but also to be savvy about systems and processes. Third is our culture. Every culture is important, obviously, to any enterprise. Our culture, for us, is everything. One reason I think it's so darn important for us is that we don't have a marketplace telling us we did well or we did badly. In 2009, we'll spend $3 billion. In 2010, we'll spend $3 billion, whether we did that well or not. If you're in the world of trying to find an HIV vaccine, that's 15 years out. What do your marketing people tell you? There's no benchmark. It has to come from internal processes, internal metrics, but again, it has to be piece of the culture. That has to be one of the ways you bring data and focus into your organization. Our culture works very well now, is my observation. People are passionate. They believe the problems they're going after can be solved. They're intense, let me tell you. They're fun. They're great people. But like I was just saying, 200 new people in the next 18 months. right? I get a lot of nods here. A lot of you have been through this. How do you keep that going? How do you think about that? How do you be purposeful? The chassis has to deal with culture, not just systems and people and numbers. It has to deal with the fundamental beliefs of a system and an organization. And that's what we're up to right now. As an example, we've just redesigned our orientation program for new employees. Now it will involve, and when we use this word immersion, I always think of this dunk tank, this poor employee coming in and being dunked. But it is, we're calling it immersion. And is really trying to get a very intense set of experiences for our staff as soon as they've joined the foundation. So they start to understand the preeminence of culture as we move forward. I kind of want to just stop here for a second and just reflect on as I close. The problems of scale, and you've all faced this, can be indeed addressed by great people, great technologies, and great culture. But I would posit to you that the inequities of our world cannot. For that, we need something very, very different. And that is why we all are here today. While our resources are vast at the Gates Foundation and many other of our colleague foundations throughout this community and throughout the United States, they're nothing. They are literally a drop in the bucket compared to the scope of the problems we're dealing with. We need business, governments, not-for-profit groups, heroes on the ground in the slums and the villages around the world to work together. As my dad said 1,000 years ago, it's a team sport, Cheryl, and you never want to be on the bench. So that's how I would like to conclude today. I know that so many of you do already do this, and I would think that we all would want to say at this moment in time in our history that we all want to get into the game. Maybe you've got a passion for helping sick kids in Africa, or perhaps it's a homeless family right here in your hometown. At the end of the day, we can't solve any of these problems unless each and every one of us decides we're on it, on this planet, we're on it, in it together, and we all have a role. But once you make this decision, once we collectively make this decision, we will solve this problem. The philosopher Peter Singer recently wrote a piece in the New York Times Magazine in which he proposes that without significant hardship, the richest 10% of the people in the world's richest nations could financially afford to virtually eliminate global inequities 6 times over. Not just once, 6 times over. Possibilities, they are there, they're before us. This is our century, this is our time. We have the technologies, we have the people, we have the compassion, we have the smarts, we have the discipline. We can do it, but we can only do it together. Thank you all very, very much.
I like the bare feet. Cheryl has agreed to take a few questions, and we have a microphone on each side of the room behind the projector. And so if you would like to ask a question, please step to the microphone. The presentation is being recorded for broadcast on the Seattle Rotary website, and that's why we're asking you to use the microphone. Anyone like to throw out the first question? Here she comes. Christy, you're first.
Maggie.
Oh, Maggie.
I'm going to attempt to ask this. It's kind of a complicated question, but I'm going to try and make it simple. And I think it's basically, have we given up on trying to cut the pie more equally and just now have decided that we're just going to make the pie bigger? The root cause of poverty is not, I don't think, being addressed.
Yeah.
In terms of how government allocates its money,
Right.
the political reasons it does what it does.
Right.
So are we stepping up to the plate, which then gives government, I guess, the way out?
That's a really good question, and actually a big debate in philanthropy is, if philanthropy comes in, does that somehow say the government or business comes in philanthropy? Does it mean that we as a civil society can take a pass? That's your question. No, it doesn't, obviously. At the foundation, from its very early days, we've really acknowledged this notion and the need for advocacy. And so for every single one of our programs, we have a pretty darn big advocacy group tied to each one of the programs to deal with that very issue. To ignore government would be absurd, obviously, but without some catalytic thinking and some art of the possible, so people can imagine a different way of being. It's hard because of all the different self-interests within a governmental model to really break through. So it's a partnership in every way.
Again, I encourage you to come to the microphones. And since
It's okay if you don't. I mean, it's fine. It's fine.
Let me ask one more question referring to the Singer article. One of the things that struck me was I think it's an easy for us to look at the generous gift of Bill and Melinda Gates, to look at the Buffett addition to that generous gift, and think that, well, this is high leverage money and the rest of us, we can't do very much. But one of the things I think that was underscored in that article, that if all of us gave a portion of our relative wealth, that's what gives us the resources to do this 6 times over.
Yeah, I think the article was kind of pie in the sky, and we would all sing Kumbaya and life would be good, right? But I do think if you took 10% of the wealthiest people in the wealthiest countries and you solve that problem 6 times over, there might be something in that, right? And I think that's what, it was sort of almost like a challenge to all of us, to redefine the art of the possible.
Exactly, and I think it's hard for us. I was struck as we're sitting here, we all have these empty glasses on the table. I guess they were for the tea, but the whole half empty, half full. It's hard for us to realize that most of us in this room are in the richest 1% of the people on the planet. We tend to think of ourselves as middle class, but in global terms, we're really not. And we can make a big difference.
We can.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to do a public thank you to the Gates Foundation. I'm Ruth Ann Howell, and I'm the CEO President at Family Services.
Hey, Ruth.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
And I just want to say thank you for the support that you're doing and partnering with Rotary and the Centennial Project and our organization in ending homelessness permanently for 5,000 families in the next 10 years, working with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
As organizations like the Gates Foundation actually start spending money in the field, to what extent are you concerned about, and how do you plan to deal with the issues of corruption that have plagued so many government aid programs?
Really good question. We are right now starting to do some what's called landscape reviews, which is really to try to understand just a problem in general. And one of those reviews is what we're calling governance in the developing world. What are the governance challenges? What are the governance models that work? We know the corruption. We know the terrible tragedy when we do something, what can happen with dysfunctional governments. So our foundation is starting to commit to at least understanding where an organization such as ours could have some impact. But probably more importantly, what could be a collaborative of other organizations of like-minded institutions to really have an impact in a significant way. In our point of view, without dealing with the governance questions, we're only going to be able to go so far because of many of the issues that you talked about.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Cheryl. That was just great. We're just honored to have you back with us. I want to thank Cheryl. It's just an honor to have her back with us. We've got to get her back into Rotary. I've been ending each Rotary meeting this year with a pretty good rule for life, which is a bit of wisdom that I've collected over the years. And the one today comes from James Reston, and I thought it was particularly appropriate for an economic forecast luncheon. When Mr. Reston's first grandson was born, he wrote him a letter, and then he published it in his column in the New York Times, and in it he had this advice: stick with the optimists. Things are going to be tough enough if they're right. See you next week.
Seattle Rotary Online is made possible in part by a grant from Enterprise Seattle. For over 35 years, Enterprise Seattle has provided client-based economic development services to businesses throughout King County and its 39 cities. More information on Enterprise Seattle and how they help businesses grow and prosper can be found at www.enterpriseseattle.org. And by First Choice Health, working with the Washington Health Information Collaborative to use technology to bring better health care to patients throughout the Pacific Northwest. First Choice Health.